You're listening to KRUULP 100.1 FM, the voice of Fairfield, Iowa, and beyond, the Midwest only solar-powered radio station. My name is Dennis Ramundi. My show is Speaking Freely. My website, www.dennis.tv, about 500 shows archived there. Today, on a special edition of Speaking Freely, my co-host will be Phil Goldberg. Phil is the author of American Veda. He's authored several books, and he's also on the speaking circuit. Our guest today, Dr. John Prendergast, who is a psychotherapist, retired professor of psychology, and a spiritual teacher. His latest book, In Touch, How to Tune In to the Inner Guidance of Your Body and Trust Yourself. It's available on Amazon.com, at Barnes & Noble. His website is listeningfromsilence.com. John, thank you so very much for taking the time to come on our show today.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you. John, let me start the questions with this intersection of spirituality and psychology that you have been on the cutting edge of for many years. Most of the people I know who are psychotherapists and have a spiritual orientation were psychotherapists first, and then they sort of discovered the spiritual dimension. You came at it in the opposite way. Maybe you could tell us about your own background and how you came to this intersection that we're at now.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I should probably start in my boyhood because I had these unusual experiences, probably between the ages of 10 and 13, where often when I would start falling asleep, I would go into a kind of waking dream state, and I would feel my body becoming infinitely large and then infinitely small. And it was a very compelling, even ecstatic experience, but I never shared it with anyone and had no way of understanding what was going on. And when puberty hit, I forgot all about it. But when I became a TM meditator when I was 20 years old and had my second meditation, I opened up again to this sense of the infinite. So spirituality has been a very keen interest of mine since my late teens. And I became a TM teacher briefly and then left that organization. But I realized I had a lot of psychological work to do on myself. Even though I'd be very calm on retreats and sitting in meditation, I was rather anxious in terms of being in relationship with people. So I had work to do that wasn't being touched by meditation. And also I wanted to do something that would be of service to others. So that led me into graduate school in psychology, and I got both my master's and my doctorate. And it was as if there were two parallel tracks in my life. One was to develop psychologically and the other spiritually, and that at some point I couldn't separate them. It was very interesting. And so as presence came more into the foreground, I would say, I began to work with people more explicitly in a spiritual way, and including psychological dimensions as well. So now I can't actually differentiate the two. So I began, with a deep spiritual interest and realized I had a lot to look at in terms of my conditioned body, mind, and then as that lessened, as that attenuated, that I found a confluence between the two.
Right. John, let me ask. You just said your presence came more to the forefront. What do you mean by that?
There's a sense of open, radiant awareness that's in the background of all of our awarenesses. Normally our attention is absorbed in thoughts and feelings and sensations and actions. So we're paying attention really to what we need to get tasks done in our ordinary relationships. But in the background, we're always aware. Whatever experience we're having requires that we're aware of it, but we're usually not aware of awareness. So when we're aware of awareness, when attention shifts to this background, to this source, there's a sense of presence that emerges, a sense of openness, a sense of radiance, a sense of non-separateness of all of life. So I refer to that as presence.
Now you used an interesting phrase, and I'm laughing because I know how hard it is to find language for these things. And you said, when we become aware of awareness, as if the we was somehow different from the awareness.
Yes,
exactly. Can you sort of unpack that a little bit for the listeners?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, normally we take ourselves as a separate self. You know, we believe that we are in this body and we are the doer, um, and so there's a sense of separation from this larger field of awareness, and I could call that a conditioned identity. So when I'm speaking of we, that's what I'm referring to, the sense of a separate self. And then as that sense of separate self begins to hone in on its source, you know, it discovers that it's not separate at all. It's like the wave discovering the ocean.
John, let me follow up on that. And is the goal of your spiritual practice, you consider yourself a spiritual teacher, and the spiritual practices that you give other people, is it to be aware of that awareness? And if so, why is that a good thing?
Well, I would say that's the first step because, first of all, it brings a sense of tremendous inner freedom. And we're looking for freedom in terms of generally being unconstrained in our outer life. But if we're feeling constrained inwardly, we'll never really discover the full freedom. So if we're interested in real freedom and in real autonomy, knowing who we really are and being at peace with ourselves, it's extremely important. But I would say it's just the first step, actually, to be aware of our true nature. It's another to really embody it in our lives, in our ordinary lives, in our relationships, in our work, so that we feel congruent with that. And what it brings is a sense of deep intimacy and authenticity and connection as well. So it's a sense of coming home, which I think all spiritual traditions speak of. And it's a deep yearning that we all have. Mm-hmm. And we have a deep grief when we turn away from that for various reasons. So I think it's why we're here. I think we are here to wake up and recognize who we are. And I think we're also here to live a creative and loving life. And this is the foundation of that.
John, the language you're using and the sort of conceptual framework is what some people call non-duality. And you've been associated with a group of psychotherapists and psychologists in non-duality and psychotherapy. There's a lot of talk about non-duality today, and it's usually associated with the Eastern traditions. Can you explain what is meant by non-dualism and non-duality?
I'll try. So, non-dual means not two, and it's actually a literal translation of the Indian word advaita, which means not two. And what is not two is the apparent subject and object, the apparent perceiver and perceived. Again, we have this sense of being a separate self, but it's basically an illusion. It's a very compelling one, and most people believe it, and we certainly share that collectively, but it's actually not true. And when we go deeply into who we really are through self-inquiry and meditation and silence, everything we've taken ourselves to be begins to dissolve. It's quite interesting and also quite frightening for people, which is why many people avoid the subject. But when we go deeply into inquiry and into a contemplative experience of the self, it dissolves, it opens up, and we discover ourselves as this vast, infinite awareness. It's actually not separate from anything, anyone. And that's what non-duality is referring to.
For those just tuning in, you're listening to KRUU LP 100.1 FM. My name is Dennis Mundy. My co-host today, Mr. Phil Goldberg, author of American Veda, and our guest, Dr. John Prendergast, who is a psychotherapist, retired professor of psychology, and a spiritual teacher. His book, In Touch, How to Tune into the Inner Guidance of Your Body and Trust Yourself. It is available at Barnes & Noble, Amazon.com, his website, listeningfromsilence.com. If you're driving in your car and you didn't get that, call into the station or email me and I'll get you that information. John, when I'm going to get into this discussion of non-duality that Phil brought up, somebody comes to you and they say, "This all sounds good, John. You're a spiritual teacher. Take me there." Is there a course? Are there procedures? Are there spiritual practices that you teach? What do you actually teach folks who come to you wanting to learn more about this?
Well, I approach it differently depending on the level of interest and capacity of the person, and also the role that I'm working in. So I kind of wear two hats, although sometimes both hats at the same time. Which is to say, if I'm working with clients, generally they're coming in because they're suffering, they're unhappy, and they want to feel better. So in that case, we work very carefully together to go into their direct experience. What is the feeling? What is the sensation? What is the belief? And is the belief true? And so by going directly into experience and being intimate with it, very interestingly, it opens up. It deepens and it opens, and we go to, quite naturally, without introducing a specific practice, into the core or essence of who we are. I also lead self-inquiry groups, and in these groups, for instance, we'll start with a guided meditation to simply notice present experience, relax, let go, and rest in the open awareness that's always here. And then that's more of a meditative practice, and anyone can do that at any time. We can take 10 or 15 minutes during the day and turn off our smartphones and close the door and sit upright comfortably and feel our body and our breath and just let go, into silence. So that's always a good practice, and spending time in nature is a good practice as well. And another very useful practice is self-inquiry. And self-inquiry is to ask the question. It has many variations. It's to find what question is really alive for you. And then ask very sincerely, assuming that you want the truth. What is the truth about this? Who am I really? What is this? What is it that I really want? What's most important in my life? And to sit with that question, to be quiet, to not go to the mind for an answer, but let something else, an internal wisdom, begin to bubble up through the body. And that's part of what my book is about, as well, is to be able to begin to listen to the body and the information that comes from that. So attuning with the body is also an important aspect of practice as well.
John, before we get to the substance of your new book, I want to parse out what you just said about self-inquiry. That term is usually associated with spiritual teacher, a great legendary guru from India called Ramana Maharshi, as you know. And in the self-inquiry methods that many people advocate these days, the idea is to ask, who am I? And I always thought self-inquiry is an unfortunate term because it sounds like an intellectual process when it's more than that. And you were speaking of it in terms of questions to ask yourself about the substance of one's life. Can you sort those two different things out?
Yeah, I think I'm glad you mentioned that, Phil. I wanted to start with the question. I'd like to start, what is this really most important? What really has the deepest value for you? And what is it, and are you really interested in knowing the truth? These are like preliminary questions to begin self-inquiry. And it's important to listen and see what comes, because sometimes we really don't want to know what we really know. So that's important. And if we really do want to know who we are and what this is all about, then I think we can proceed to the other questions, which is, then who am I, really? Now that question, who or what am I, can often be taken on the level of the mind, in which case it becomes a repetitive question and not a very fruitful response that ensues from that. But if we sit with the question, starting with the question, who or what am I, or alternatively, as Nisargadatta Maharaj might suggest, with the felt sense of the I or the I am, we can sit with it and trace it back to a sense of silence and to source. And this is what Ramana was pointing to. There's no verbal answer to this. In fact, the question is a way of helping us really sink into who we fundamentally are prior to the conditioned mind.
Right. John, I want to try to understand the role of the teacher in one pursuing this path of understanding non-duality. And it seems that most of the folks I know that are involved with this path have a teacher, and it seems that like many other spiritual groups, they're guru-centric. And what role does on the one hand, it sounds very simple, like, okay, understand, ask yourself, go within, who am I? How am I separate from everything else in life? How am I not separate from everything else in life? But at the same time, there seems to be almost a spiritual hierarchy with a guru on top, who's leading the person. Even though in many cases they say it's not a guru, it seems very guru-centric to me. Can you address that?
Sure. I think, the beauty of self-inquiry is it actually doesn't require, an external teacher. You can sit with these questions on your own. And there's a legitimate role for a teacher as well. But an outer teacher is just someone who's recognized the inner teacher within themselves and helps point students to that. So, for instance, I've had my two main teachers were Jean Klein, who was an Advaita master from Europe, and Adyashanti, and with whom I listened to a lot of talks and went to retreats, but neither of whom were interested in imposing a point of view. They were simply encouraging resting in presence and a deep inquiry, and they were very catalytic, both of them, for me, in terms of the unfolding of this awareness. So I have actually a deep respect and appreciation for teachers who don't abuse their power and who understand that their role is simply to point students to their own inner knowing as well. And once that's happened, to let go and to not be attached to, being worshipped or adored or anything of that sort. So I think there's a legitimate role for teachers, but primarily the responsibility is that of the student. And it depends on their motivation and their intent. So, yeah, there's certainly, that tradition can be easily abused. And I think there are plenty of Westerners who jump into the role too quickly and lack the maturity and sense of responsibility to handle, the role that they do have.
Hey, John, as a psychotherapist, as you said, people come to you because they're suffering, they're in pain. A lot of the people, teachers or somewhat guru type of people in the non-dual world of Advaita would say that suffering is an illusion and one shouldn't pay attention to these upheavals of relative existence and always come back to the freedom of the unconditioned self. You obviously see it differently, and you see a great synergy between non-duality and the ultimate non-duality and the relative self of personality involved in the world. How do you use your non-dual perspective and methods in helping people deal with the stuff of life that they come to you for as a psychotherapist?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, as I was suggesting earlier, we can actually work with any experience so that it becomes a portal to our true nature. It may take a while, depending on the density of the conditioning. But if we just if we continually shift our attention, let's say, from our difficult feelings and thoughts to a transcendent awareness, it will only work for temporarily, and eventually attention will come back to these knots of conditioning that are requiring attention. And this is something I think we've learned in the last few decades, that a purely transcendental approach won't work. It creates avoidance on the human level. So we have to work with it one way or the other. The more in touch we are with presence and openness, the more freedom we have actually to work with our conditioning. So I do think it's extremely important to be in touch with that. But it's very important to be what I would say intimate with our experience. And that means to be willing to feel our feelings deeply, to open to them and let them move, not to dump them on other people, not to act them out, but to tolerate them and feel them deeply. And very interestingly, when we stop resisting and actually let ourselves have our experience, it will unwind and open.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, if we stop repressing grief and let ourselves feel it, there may be tears, there may be shaking in case of fear, and then the body resolves itself and comes to a more peaceful, homeostatic state. So it's also true in terms of our thoughts to be able to see, what the operating system is in terms of our core limiting beliefs, and to question them as well from a kind of heart wisdom. So these are some of the ways I work with people. I encourage them to feel their feelings deeply. I encourage them to sense their sensations, feel their bodies as well, and to see what their operating system is in terms of the core limiting beliefs, and to question them deeply from a heart-centered wisdom.
For those just tuning in, you're listening to KRUULP 100.1 FM. My name is Dennis Mundy. My co-host, Mr. Phil Goldberg, and our guest today, Dr. John Prendergast, a psychotherapist and spiritual teacher. His latest book, In Touch, How to Tune Into the Inner Guidance of Your Body and Trust Yourself, now available at Amazon.com and Barnes & Noble and everywhere else. John, interesting point you were making, and so what I'm getting from what you're saying is that in addition to just discovering or inquiring and finding that non-changing aspect of yourself within, and asking those questions about who I am and whatnot, one also needs guidance or needs work in how to deal with people, how to deal with one's emotions, how to deal with how one functions in the world. In addition to that, but by discovering that inner silence or whatever you call it, it makes that process of working out other things in life easier. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's right. That's my experience and the experience of many other people. When we have that kind of sense of inner freedom, or greater freedom at least, in greater space, then we can actually be with our experience as it is, rather than judging it and trying to manipulate it. And so we enter into it. It's very interesting. It's like when we're with other people, if we are trying to continually make them change, they feel it and they resent it, and they'll distance from us. And the same happens with our interior experience, difficult feelings, troublesome thoughts. The more we try to argue with them and judge them and push them away, the more they distance from us and the more difficult they are actually to work through. And I think our inner experience is really waiting to be met with a certain quality of attention, what I call affectionate attention, spacious and clear and warm-hearted. It's all waiting to be touched and met by that quality of awareness and understanding. And when it is, it naturally begins to transform, not because the mind has an agenda for it to change, but actually it relaxes and is waiting to be met with love and understanding, just as people are. So we know we feel relaxed when people accept us as we are, and that's true of our inner experience as well. So I think it's really a critically important point.
John, your book, In Touch, focuses, it seems, on the sort of wisdom of the body, and you are guiding people into getting in touch, as the title suggests, with what they can learn, and from a greater sense of intimacy with their bodily sensations and stuff. Is that correct? Can you
that's correct, and particularly the subtler feelings in the interior of the trunk of the body, and the heart area, and the belly, solar plexus and belly as well. And what I've noticed, this has been quite interesting in my 3 decades of work with people, both as a psychotherapist and as a spiritual counselor, is that when people hone in on their truth, and this can be a relative truth about a relationship or a feeling or a career, there are certain subtle somatic markers that begin to appear. And I'll just mention what those are briefly that I've noticed. One is that there's a relaxation in the core of the body. When we get in touch with our truth, there's something that just kind of melts and relaxes in the interior, and the tension tends to drop down. from the head into the trunk and even lower into the hips and the legs, and we feel more grounded. So the truth is, it's very interesting. The truth is inherently grounding when we live in accord with it, and there are many levels of that ground that we can deepen into. One of the other signs that we're honing in our truth is the opening of the heart. We feel more radiance, more warmth, more space in the heart area in the center of the chest. We feel more loving, appreciative, and grateful as well. This is a sign that we're honing in on our truth. We also feel a sense of inner alignment. The truth sets us up in a very interesting way. We feel a sense of alignment, a sense of integrity, a sense of aliveness. All of those qualities are related. And we also feel a sense of space, both within our body and around our body as well. So our body will respond very interestingly to the truth, relatively and absolutely as well. And this is really, really helpful information to be attuned with. So we don't rely just on our minds, but our bodies respond to the truth that way.
John, we have about 2 minutes, 3 minutes left. And one last question. What happens, what do you believe happens when the body is done, when a person passes away? I had a show on recently with Dr. Eben Alexander. He addressed his thoughts on it from his own experience. What do you believe takes place?
I think death is a transition in consciousness. I don't know for certain, but I've had little peaks, I would say, around this. One when my late wife died, and immediately in the ER after she was pronounced dead, and I was sitting kind of in shock in another room, a chaplain's office. I felt her presence very strongly. Say, "Don't grieve for me. I'm happy to be free of this body." And that was quite powerful. So I have the sense that it's really a transition, that we're not limited in terms of who we think we are. And there are other levels and dimensions that continue beyond physical death.
Thank you very much. You're listening to KRUU LP 100.1 FM. My name is Dennis Ramoney. My show is Speaking Freely. My co-host today, Phil Goldberg, author of American Veda, a book I highly recommend. And our guest today, Dr. John Prendergast, who's a psychotherapist, retired professor of psychology, and a spiritual teacher. His book, In Touch, How to Tune into the Inner Guidance of Your Body and Trust Yourself. I haven't read it yet. I will read it. I'm looking forward to it. I encourage our listeners to do the same. You want to find out more about John and his work, his website, listeningfromsilence.com. You can call or email me at the station, and I'll get you that information. John, thank you so very much for coming on the show today.
You're very welcome. I enjoyed it.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
You're welcome.